Ay, ay, ay.
And
How are you?
I'm good. He heard the word treat, so now he's just staring at me. It's weird. It's awkward. But no, overall, I am good. Is the audio looking okay? Sorry, because my producer is also in here.
Hmm.
So audio is good. Okay, excellent. Um,
Great.
yeah, you can. I'm obviously not putting on a camera. It's up to you if you want to leave your camera on. But we'll just put up stock photos over the video when we post this.
Great.
But yeah, so I really wanted to get you on a podcast for Swap and Swap Behind Bars because we've never done it before, right?
No, I mean, in fact, I think that our first conversations were around doing a podcast or something. I think that was like the first thing that came out of it. And then, um, no, we never did.
We never did, and we should have. And we should do it more often, I think. So, if you would like to give us just a little bit of background about what you do and how often you get lawmakers to yell at you, because apparently that's like constantly.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm Mike Stabile. I am uh, currently the director of public policy at Free Speech Coalition, which is the adult industry trade and advocacy organization.
Yes.
But I have been in the adult industry for about, I don't know, 20 years, and have worked both through FSC and then on my own with sex worker groups, with activist groups around sexual rights, and have worked with adult companies, have worked with on sort of different campaigns, everything from fighting mandatory condom legislation to, Sesta Fosta
Hmm.
to what I'm dealing with primarily now, which is sort of age verification rules. So, what I do, I guess, in my role at FSC most recently is, I guess, like I was explaining to my boyfriend's family last night, lobby, I
Hmm.
guess, is sort of what I've become. I sort of have a media strategy background. I worked as a journalist. I made documentary films. That was sort of how I came to all of this. And I saw sort of early on that the adult industry was having trouble communicating.
Yes.
That there's often a disconnect, largely because of stigma, but also and because of trauma, right?
Hmm.
The fact that media doesn't treat and legislators don't treat sex workers and sex related businesses all that well.
Right.
Um, but also just trying to figure out ways in which we can communicate our message a little bit more clearly. And so I started working with FSC on some campaigns, largely sort of talking with press and trying to help them understand the issues. Like I said, I've worked with sex worker groups as well to sort of help finesse that. And then going to legislators and to ally organizations and trying to help them understand um, why it is that we oppose these bad laws.
Right.
And sometimes, as you mentioned, they yell at me. Um,
Yes. Yeah, no, it's both like terrifying and exhilarating to read your social media updates, right? Because you're like, oh, look at Mike, he's doing the thing, and he went to another state and he's giving them the business while they're trying to pass this law. And then, like, you'll tweet like 5 hours later, be like, so they just yelled at me and didn't like
yeah.
anything I said. It's like, mm,
It is, it's a funny, it's a funny thing. And that sometimes you really never know what you're going to say that's going to be effective. And you don't know what it is, from an activist standpoint, especially in a legislative standpoint, like like if it's going to have any effect at all. And I've certainly gone in to some hearings and thought, this is absolutely bonkers. I have gotten up at 5 a.m. to get on a flight to go to this state that is a deep red state that is not going to listen to anything that I have to say. I'm here at this panel, before this committee. I'm listening to the bills that they're voting on. You know, um, I'm looking up the bios of the people who are on the panel. This person runs a mega church, right? This
Mm-hmm.
person was at January 6th. This person, is an oath keeper, right? Like, you're like, they're not going to listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
But, you have to make the point. You have to, like, one, I am a firm believer in that if you don't show up and you don't fight back, they're never going to, listen to you.
Right.
And then, and then sometimes magic happens. And sometimes, for reasons that you can't understand, they listen and they decide to kill a bill. Most of it is sort of long range hard work with allies and strategizing and things like that. But, other times it is just you show up and you say something, and sometimes, most of the time, they yell at you and say that porn causes crime, and why are you a groomer? But sometimes they say, oh, we're going to hold this bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recall like a while ago we had a conversation about this, and you mentioned that happened because someone who was, I want to say QAnon adjacent, with thinking like pornography creates like sex trafficking and like child grooming and things like that, wanted to pass an age verification bill, but they didn't realize that like if that bill passed, they themselves would have to upload their ID to like basically log onto the internet, and they were like, wait a minute, I don't actually want that.
A lot of people, it's, we talk, I mean, I talk about this all the time, right? You talk about this all the time. We sort of know the issues with bad sex legislation, right?
Yes.
People who are in the industry, often get it because we're dealing with it. We understand the consequences of it. And the reality, right? Like, people who are creating content for platforms, right? Sex workers
Mm-hmm.
who are working on OnlyFans or some of these other platforms understand what it takes to, scan your face and like upload ID and get kicked off for doing the most minor thing possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they can see through when legislators say these sites are full of trafficking and they're full of abused people, right? We understand the difference between what these people are saying and what the reality of the situation is. But because we live it, and because it's just sort of our beat, but legislators, for the most part, have no idea what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even at like the U.S. Senate level, right? The sort of the top of the top, the people who are sort of full-time legislators, they're dealing with, multiple bills and they're not paying attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get down to the state level, often what you're dealing with is people who are really part-time legislators, right?
Yeah.
Like, they may be a lawyer, or they may have a used car dealership, or they may have a church that they run, or something like that. They're really not paying attention. And when they get into the office for that short period of time that the legislature is in session, most of these are sort of in session from January to April, on odd days or things like that. They get in and they've got 20 bills, and they think, oh, well, here's one, age verification for social media, or for adult content.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want minors accessing adult content. We need to give an ID to see, to buy liquor. Well, this seems the same. The proponents are saying there's no big deal. There's no constitutional issues. Yes, that seems fine to me.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, right? And so I think that sometimes you get in there and you talk to people and you say, this is different than you think.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're talking to a Dem legislator or you're someone nominally on the left and saying, hey, listen, there's other consequences on this you might want to think about. And sometimes you're talking to someone on the right and saying, listen, you can't require just minors to submit, to age verification. Everybody has to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means that they're going to, that you're getting biometric scans, right? That you're dealing with digital ID, these things that are nominally concerned on the right. And suddenly they say, oh, that is a problem. Now, whether or not they vote to oppose it, often they say, I understand that it's a big issue and I dislike this bill and it is against everything in my principles. However, I'm going to vote yes because I think we need to protect the children.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest like points of frustration that I have is that the whole like common sense goes out the window once you're like, but we have to protect children because nobody wants to be seen as someone who's like, I don't give a fuck about kids, right? And like no one wants
Yep.
that that's sort of like put on them. But at the same time, it's like, if you aren't critically examining the bills, how they're implemented, the text of the bills, all these things, then you're going to end up in a situation where these bills that were allegedly meant to protect children hurt everybody. And it's like, I wish I could get more people to understand that, because it seems like it's such a knee-jerk reaction when you say, like, this is to protect children or this is to prevent sex trafficking. Everyone is like uncritically like, yeah, sign it, do the thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's
Yeah.
not helpful, actually, because a lot of these bills are terrible, you know?
Yeah, and I think that the strongest argument that I have found in sort of all of this work, right? Because you're absolutely correct, right? Nobody is there's no pro trafficking movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the legislative level, right? Nobody is coming in and saying like, oh yes, we're in support of trafficking. There's only just different people who are coming in, like you or like me, talking about like this is bad legislation because.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, but legislators, they're averse to, when it comes to sex, they lose their minds,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable for them to talk about, and it's uncomfortable. They don't want to be seen as, oh, I'm on the side of, I'm on the side of traffickers, or I'm on the side of, prostitutes, or I'm on the side of like child abusers or things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of what the opposite side, that's what the right really weaponizes. And
Mm-hmm.
so you've got a lot of people who are like, well, this we do have this problem. We should probably do something. And beyond that, I don't want this used in a campaign ad against me.
Right.
Right. I don't want, and we hear this all the time with legislators who, oppose these bills, but say, oh, I am in a really tough position because I'm up for election, especially if you're assembly member or House member, right? You're going to be running every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be a campaign ad advancement. They voted against, common sense protections for children online.
Right.
And so I think that, like, to your original point, like, I think that the thing that is effective sometimes is that this is going to do more harm than good.
Right.
Right? This is going to make it worse. That's what I try to communicate to people all the time. We can find a way to solve this issue. It doesn't have to be this bill, right? Or we can amend this bill. And that gives them a little bit of a way to say, okay, I'm going to address the problem, but I don't want to make it worse. I think that we are just by nature risk averse.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that I'm doing something that actually might make it worse is a strong argument against it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that working. And like, I really try to tell people to have nuance about the topic, because it's like, this is a serious topic. This is a serious problem. If we're talking about child exploitation or minors being harmed, like, that is serious. So we should seriously, really take our time to craft a bill, to craft policy that's going to be beneficial, right? And,
Yeah.
it's kind of hit and miss with who listens and who doesn't. But yeah, a lot of people are still too stuck in that knee jerk of like, but they said it's to protect the kids. I can't question it. I can't say anything. And it's like, all right.
I mean, that's why this is a long range strategy, right? Like, we have to keep fighting on multiple fronts. We have
Yes.
to it can't just be, any of the work that I'm doing in the legislature is going to be undergirded by the work that is done in the streets, right?
Right.
And the work that is done with our allies, and the ability of like people who are working in the sex industry to have the bandwidth to fight, right?
Yes.
And to change the conversation, and the social media conversations that I think have been so absolutely essential to where we've gotten, right? In terms of having people look at sex workers and understand that they are not aliens.
Yeah.
Right? That they didn't come down, or like, I mean, like that sort of dropping all that stigma is so essential to this. And I think that that's where everybody can be involved in this, in this fight. Everybody has a role.
It's so funny that you say that, because I had a call yesterday with some college students. They were adorable. They were so lovely. But they were taking a class and had questions about like where sex workers' rights ties into like the larger labor rights movement from like a feminist perspective, And it was so interesting because one of the things I pointed out was I was like, a lot of people don't see sex work as real work because sex workers are generally essentially the equivalent of entrepreneurs, right? Like we don't punch in with a time card, we don't clock
Hmm.
out, we don't have like a scheduled shift. It's, there's a lot of, we do our own taxes, that sort of thing. And someone on the call was like, wait, I didn't think about it like that because I'm a real estate agent and I do all those things too. I was like, see, closer to us than you thought. And I love when I have the ability to sort of like make those connections and build those bridges because a lot of the anti sex work stuff is um, framed explicitly as about being specifically about sex work or being about sex trafficking. And a lot of people don't realize how many connections there are to other industries or to other social justice issues, and like I wish that
Hmm.
we had more I guess more public facing conversations around that. Like I had to point out to someone, I was like, yeah, so a lot of the technology that was used to start surveilling sex workers to allegedly stop trafficking is now the same surveillance that's being used on women in states with abortion bans to make sure that you
Yep.
don't leave the state to have
Yep.
an abortion. Like we're kind of all in this together, whether you like it or not,
Yep.
And
Yep.
I really just wish that there were more conversations about it like that because a lot of people will be like, well, why would you defend porn? Or I don't like porn. And it's like, you don't have to like porn, but you should still be able to see that banning porn, which is an incredibly vague, nebulous
Yep.
concept, leads to banning other things, anything that's
Hmm.
sexual. Like, it started with, I don't think that, BDSM is good, so I want to ban all porn that showcases BDSM. And now suddenly we're in a climate where, like, we're banning websites that talk about birth control or
Yep.
safer sex practices. And it's like, is that really what you wanted? I don't think it is. But here we are, you know?
And that's sort of what the tough thing with free speech in general is, right? And our right to speak is that, like, the whole reason that we fight, you know, for these things is because we have to defend things that we don't understand. And that's why these rights exist. The First Amendment doesn't exist because, to protect, you know, uncontroversial speech. It
Hmm.
exists to protect controversial speech. And the importance of protecting controversial speech is because my controversial speech is going to be different than your controversial speech. And if I
Yes.
don't want to be censored, you know, you don't want to be censored. And so we sort of have this sort of loose agreement that, like, that we should be able to talk about these things and we should be able to do things even if we find them personally abhorrent,
Hmm.
even if we don't understand them or we think that they're terrible. Speech, by itself should not be a crime.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that I've found is that a lot of people like really only see this along partisan lines as well, right? Where they're like,
Hmm.
"Oh, well, it's fine as long as it's someone who is my part of my political party says it, and it's not fine when someone else says it." And it's like that's a recipe for disaster, actually, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're in a situation where once the opposing party takes power, you've lost your speech,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
that folks don't necessarily realize the ramifications of what they're seeing and what they're doing when they support these sort of like anti-censorship bills, And it frustrates me. I'm sure it frustrates you too, but I really do wish that like you could just, like drill it into the consciousness of every American to be like, censorship bills are bad, actually. They don't
Yeah.
protect children, but they will prevent you from being able to speak your mind. And, one of the most glaring things I see right now is like, I'm looking at an administration that is disappearing people for protesting.
Yeah.
And that's kind of terrifying to me,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And again, in the name of safety, right? Like, well, we have to
Yes.
do this to protect the homeland. We need to do this because they're a terrorist threat or they're aiding our enemies, right? These sort of nebulous things that it's up to the government to decide what is offensive or what's not, or
Right.
what's danger or what's not. People protesting, talking about their lives, talking about their politics, right? That's it's incredibly subjective, and so is sort of the save the children thing, right? There's all of these things
Hmm.
that are, you know we could shut down the internet to save children,
Right.
right? If we wanted, right? Like, I was having an argument with a journalist the other day, And they were like, well, don't you think that this is important? And I was like, yes, but there are all of these things that are important that we could do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that could be the thing that well, kids are experiencing all of this stuff online. Well, why don't we just shut down the internet then, right? Or traffickers are using the phone line to recruit victims, right? Or to,
Mm-hmm.
to find victims. Well, why don't we shut down the phones?
Right.
There's all of these things that we could certainly do, that arguably wouldn't make it better, but like if you want to use that justification, then there's really no limit to it. And I think
Right.
that like there are ways in which like we need to, like you said, to sort of normalize the idea that you know the danger exists, right? Things exist, and it's
Mm-hmm.
important to be, and we can't just shut down everything, to any speech that we don't like, right? We can't just say, "Oh, well, I don't like this, so we're going to get rid of it," because it's going to come back to haunt you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I just no, I agree 100%, and I just don't understand why more people don't see like where a lot of this stuff is headed. It's like they don't understand the concept of a slippery slope. Like they don't have the concept of like where could this potentially end up in a place that I don't agree with, Like they're so
Yeah,
stuck on the like, but I don't like it, so I don't want to see it, so therefore it should be gone, And like one of the things I point out, and of course is we're talking about like sexual content not being available to minors. Like there's lawmakers who argue that like you can't even have like nude selfies of yourself on your phone, right? Dusty
yeah,
Devers, who
yeah,
keeps trying to pass legislation that were like if I take a picture of my own naked body and keep it on my phone, I'm a
yeah.
criminal. Like this
You're a
is
criminal.
where it's going, with these censorship laws, right? We've had lawmakers who have tried to. Who have argued that certain types of clothing shouldn't be allowed, right? There was the one who wanted to
Yeah,
ban yoga pants. And
yoga
it's like,
pants.
really think about like the most absurd possible conclusion and then realize there's someone in some position of power who wants to enable that, you know?
Yeah,
And
I have a
I wish people understood that.
yeah, and I think that I think that sadly, given the state of things right now, the next generation is going to understand it, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of the sort of the free speech protections we take for granted come out of things like the McCarthy era and the Red
Hmm.
Scare, right? Where the government really was censoring and really was prosecuting political views. And not that it ever really stopped, but I don't think we were at that level of aggression. I think that certainly, in the 80s and the attacks on, you know, HIV prevention and things
Hmm.
like that. Congress was very aggressive about shutting down funding and things for, funding for the arts, funding for things that were controversial. And so there are people who were around for there who understand it. But I think that for the people in the past 20 years who've had access to the internet, it seems as if speech is unlimited, right? Like
Hmm.
that you're going to be able to access it, and you can't think about the government um, cracking down. And in fact, the government hasn't, with a few exceptions around sex work and terrorism, right?
Right.
The assumed threat of terrorism, they haven't cracked down
I
in
just,
that way. And I think that people are starting to see, oh, this is what it means, to have someone who says, I don't think, I think this speech is dangerous and we need to shut it down. Whether that is, porn or TikTok or any number of things, or funding for quote unquote DEI programs, right? Or pressuring a newspaper, right? We're starting to see, oh, this is why we don't give government this power. This is why we restrict this power. This is why something that we have to fight. And so, unfortunately, I think the next generation will have a sense of it because they'll have experienced it firsthand. And you go back to the idea of like, yes, I do not like Andrew Tate, but
mhm.
I cannot argue that the government has a right to silence him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would like to think that if you're charged with human trafficking, that should be enough to take you down. Like
Yes.
it's,
Well, that's and this is sort of where like there's a difference between the crime, right? You can be punished for a crime,
right.
but saying having a podcast that I think is appalling,
Hmm.
and I think that is detrimental to like, do I think that young kids should be listening to Andrew Tate? Do I think that it harms them? Yes. Do I think that like the government should be able to shut down a podcast? No. Could they arrest him for sex trafficking? Yes. That's a different thing. And I think that what we see on the right, particularly, although I think there's variance on the left for sure, right, is that often patrolling speech is about patrolling action, right?
Yeah.
It's not, you know, um, you know, like it's not that you can't arrest someone for sex trafficking because they've got a podcast, but what they end up saying when you're talking about like Dusty Deevers in Oklahoma banning sexting, right, or
Hmm.
banning just any sort of representation of sexuality, whether it's private or commercial or whatever else, is that they don't think you should be doing that thing, and so for them,
Right.
you taking a nude selfie, or having porn on your computer, it's not so much that, like, that's the visible part that they can arrest, right? So they
Hmm.
don't like you masturbating. They don't like you having sex outside of a heteronormative Christian marriage, right? They don't like women being immodest, right? They
Hmm.
don't like all of these sorts of things, and so, but in order to control it, what they want to control is sort of the representation, because they think that it is going to give other people bad ideas, or they think that it is going to lure men, or they think that like that if they can sort of put if they can silence speech, that people won't do the bad
Yeah.
actions,
Which is
right?
like, have you looked at people at all? Because that might possibly be the most like ineffective approach to trying to modify human behavior I've ever heard. But they really do keep doing
No.
it as if it's something accurate. Like, well, if you can't say gay, then no one will be gay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's that. Oh, you sweet summer child, you know. And it's very I think frustrating for me because a lot of it gets written off as like, oh, but those are just like extremists. Like Dusty Deevers is just one guy. But, I would like, again, look at this administration. All we need is one guy, maybe three guys
Yeah.
to say something. And all of a sudden, it becomes policy, it becomes law, it becomes procedure, it becomes an executive order, you know. And so I really like
No.
wish people would take it seriously because a lot of it does sound outlandish, right? Like, because what? Oh my gosh, what's the one in Texas right now? The bill they're trying to pass that you have to
The
up
sex
up.
toys.
Yes, you have to upload. If this bill passes, you would have to upload an ID to buy a sex
Yeah.
toy. Like
Yeah.
what on earth, you know? But I think that really does go back to the whole thing of like, again, think of like the most ridiculous, extreme possible extenuating circumstance of these pro censorship bills and anti sexuality bills and see where it goes. Now we have people arguing that you have to show an ID to buy a dildo. Is
Yeah.
like
and and,
is that
and
the
that you
freedom?
can't. I mean, the thing is that when you talk about Dusty Deevers, you talk about these text spills and things like that. These people are and it seems like an extreme case, but they're only the ones that are saying it out loud,
Right.
right? Like everybody else in this, I was, I will guarantee you that the sort of the right wing religious movement, right? The sort of the Christian nationalists, the evangelicals, don't like any of the things that we're talking about, right?
Hmm.
They don't like sexting, they don't like pornography, they don't like sex toys, they don't like people using sex toys, they don't like people having promiscuous sex, right? They don't like contraception, they don't like any of these things.
Right.
The only difference is when you have somebody like Dusty Deevers, come out with a bill, they're the only ones that are saying it publicly, because the other people know that it's sort of a no-go right now, right? Until
Hmm.
they can sort of shift the conversation even further right, they won't be able to do it. And we saw that with abortion, we saw that with reproductive rights,
Yes.
right? And we saw how in state after state they passed you know increased regulations on all of this type of content, saying, well, we just need that, someone needs to have an ultrasound, or there needs to be a waiting period because these people are, regretting what they're doing and it's so horrible. And we need to have a warning that this is dangerous. And we have to have all of these things that were put forth as if they were good faith arguments, right? As if
Hmm.
they were trying to solve an extra problem. Oh, they need to have hospital admissions. Oh, they have to have this. Oh, it can't be done until this term. And when they got the chance, when they had the ability, they ended it completely.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They and they made punishments for the women. They made punishments for the doctors, and they did all these things that weren't just because Roe was overturned. Right? It was predicated on years and years and years and years of challenging it and making it appear dangerous, making it appear difficult, making it sort of shifting public opinion. I remember when Trump in the first uh, campaign in 2015 said, I think there do have to be punishments for the women, who
Yeah.
have abortions. And
Yeah.
everybody screamed and said, oh, he's so extreme and he's not going to do it. All he was saying was what they were all saying privately and
Yep.
what they all wanted and what we have now. And so I think that we have to fight these incursions when they come in and when they say, oh, well, we just think that you have to upload an ID, for a dildo. We think that, that CVS shouldn't be selling lube, or we think that this is dangerous. We need this, or you need to upload an ID and scan your face in order to access porn. We're just doing it for this. No, they're doing it as that's what they can get away with now. And
Yep.
when they say, I listened to a legislator talk about in one of these state bills talking about they were flashing a warning where it says that porn is a public health crisis and and you have to upload your ID and that it's bad for you and all the rest of it. And what they said is that I just think that it's helpful to have when people are trying to access this content, to have them pause for a moment and think that maybe this isn't great. And that's what we want. We want, when we're doing age verification, we want them to think, do I really want to be doing this? So it's not about protecting minors. It's about communicating the sort of state message of this is dangerous. You might be
Mm-hmm.
being watched. You
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be doing this. And
Yes.
and I think that that's the hard thing to communicate sometimes because again, they argue these things incrementally. They argue them in sort of oh, we're just doing it to protect this or to solve this issue, and it's fucking bad faith. I'm so sick of it. I get so riled by these dumb claims that again are made in bad faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree 100% with that. And I think that, in addition to not only is it trying to convince people not to watch porn, but it also is going to fuel, all these nonsense talking points about porn addiction, which I
Yeah,
hate, by the way. Because it's
yeah,
you're not actually addicted to porn. You just feel really guilty that you looked at it because someone
yeah,
told you you're a sinner, is
yeah,
really what your
yeah,
problem is. Um, and it's, but even with pornography, I find that people be like, well, porn is bad because it's misogynistic, and it's I don't
hmm
know if you understand the history of misogyny, but let me fucking tell you,
yeah,
it started way before you could access porn on the internet. Or people well, people are taking it as sex ed, and now these men are just choking these women when they're having sex, and it's okay, so what I actually, I heard what you said, but also what I heard is that women have been in a position where they have not been taught to negotiate boundaries. Men
yeah,
have not been taught proper sexual education and what consent means, right? So
yeah.
maybe the issue isn't that someone consensually choked someone in a pornography film. Maybe the actual issue is that we don't have appropriate sex education that teaches about consent and boundaries. Maybe that's the
Yeah,
actual problem here, you know?
yeah, and maybe porn isn't sort of unique. So I've looked at there's not a lot of data. That choking thing gets thrown around lot, right? And I haven't had time to really dig into it because I've got so many other things going on. Although it probably would be worth my time. I've looked. There's a very small smattering of studies, right? Like
Hmm.
most of the data is coming from sort of one sort of study of students, right? And not quite a representative sample. And and what they say when they do talk about this is that in addition to not defining what choking is, right? Obviously, when we hear choking, it is someone's trying to choke you out,
Right.
right? As opposed to you know, hand on your neck,
Hmm.
in sort of like a display of dominance or power. There's women doing it to men, there's men doing it to women. When they talk about where they hear about it or why they think that it's acceptable, they cite porn, but they also cite um, music. They cite
Mm-hmm.
Cosmopolitan. They cite all of these different places where people, they cite celebrities talking about, liking to get choked or breath play or things like that. There are
Mm-hmm.
all of these other things. So if you want to say, okay, well, it's porn, we need to stop it in porn. You also have to say, well, we need to stop Cosmo from writing about it, right?
Right.
We need to censor that. We need to censor, pop music lyrics that reference it. We need to do this. And suddenly people start to think, oh, well, wait, maybe porn is not singular here. Maybe this
Mm-hmm.
isn't just something. I think that porn is a real good boogeyman, right?
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's it's easy to say, well, this is what it is. And I go back to that thing that you said where, people are learning this from porn. And I think it's always somebody else that's learning it from porn, right? It's never you,
Mm-hmm.
right? You always know the difference. Like the person who's saying like, oh yeah, I know the difference. Yeah, you know why? Because porn is the fakest shit that you could ever imagine, right? There's nothing that is less believable than a goddamn Brazzers video, with like a
Brazzers.
fucking babysitter who is like 30 years old and like a stepmom who's 24. Like it doesn't make any sense. It is like, God bless. I love I love my performers. I love my workers. It is not meant to be, realism.
Yeah.
And it is
Yeah.
like a fucking cartoon. And the idea that like someone else, usually, and I think that this is often like it's usually onto like the idea of like the people who are hearing this are like not mentally developed, right? And so that
Right.
could be minors, right? That can be some sort of like stupid people more generally. It's
Mm-hmm.
often racialized, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's often this idea of like there's this sort of, I know what this is, I know this is fake, I know this is, but other people seeing this, they might not know. They
Mm-hmm.
might confuse it with this. So it's always a sort of externalization. I don't think that it's rooted reality. I think that everybody sort of understands what porn is and what porn isn't. And certainly like porn can be a great tool for exploring your sexuality and for understanding things and going through things. But I don't think that for the most part, people are taking it as, you know, as like, oh, this is what you were supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Our bodies don't match that, right? Our activities don't match that. There's so many other things, but that messaging comes back all the time. They're learning it from this, and it's always a they, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's always like, yes, they're taking it as if it's National Geographic.
Yeah, and I think what's like fascinating about that to me is like it's always pornography. Like every bad behavior is learned through porn. But like no one is like, "Oh, I thought I could get away with shooting at cops because I played Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah,
Oh, I learned how to drive from watching the Fast and Furious franchise." Like somehow
yeah,
we know like where reality stops and starts with like every other
yeah,
medium except for pornography for some reason.
yeah. And
Like
nobody says, "Oh, wait, I thought I could get away with rape because the president did it 34 times."
yes.
There's no saying like, oh well, politicians and celebrities get away with this all the time. It must be okay,
It must
right?
be
It's always like,
okay.
oh no, it's porn.
No, yeah, it's only porn. Only porn. That's the only time that people
Yeah,
learn bad behaviors. Yeah, it's just wild to me how just how disingenuous the arguments are. Cuz like once you sit down for like 5 minutes and think about them, you're like, "Wait, this doesn't actually make any sense.
yeah,
How is
no,
this your
it's
argument?" You know.
but it's there's a lot, and I was screaming the other day about this BBC interview that I did,
Yes, I
and
want to see it by the way. I need to see this.
yeah, I was like, oh, well, I don't like. I'll have to see when it comes out. I think it's mid-month or something. But I had watched the original podcast with this woman that they had on who touts herself as sort of an expert in the effects of uh, children, pornography on children
Yeah. Was
and things
this
like that. And again, nobody's
was this
arguing
the
that
Carezza
kids should.
lady?
This is the Crest lady,
Yeah.
Mary Sharp, and
Okay.
so like I had gone and watched her original podcast interview, and I have like a passing awareness of her, really, like only because she'd shown up in the press. Like I think she wrote an amicus brief in the Supreme Court, and she'd shown up in the Scottish press. And I was like, oh, which one is that? Like, who is she again? You know, and like it just had like the most nominal things. But when I was asked to be on this podcast, I like went back and watched her thing, and it's sort of this is industrial strength porn, and this is harmful, and it's changing our brains, and it's
Hmm.
rewiring our brains, and like God knows, I mean, like people are like, oh, porn has this dopamine effect. It's like chocolate has a dopamine effect,
Right.
right? Like exercise has a dopamine effect.
Yeah.
Like me watching a comedy special has a dopamine effect. It doesn't rewire my fucking brain. Right, it
Yes.
doesn't absolve me of all of these. It doesn't. It is not a drug. It like I always wait. I'm always like, because to be in a position, not to give away my game, but like for people to be like, this is the same as injecting cocaine. Pornography is the same as injecting cocaine. To be like, bitch, I've done both. Like, this is not the same. Like, let me fucking tell you.
Not even remotely.
Like, IV drug use is not in any way comparable to pornography,
And
right? Like,
yes. Yes. And one of the things that's like really like getting me is the fact that like she's into Carezza, because I don't think enough
yeah,
people know what Carezza is. Because like if you knew
yes.
about Carezza, you'd be like, I'm not listening to these fucking weirdos. So
Well, that's the thing, and this is sort of where I'm like, since for the past couple of days, as I've thought about it, and as I've sort of like started to explore it, right? And Carezza, we should tell people, right? Carezza is a like quasi religious. I don't know the actual term. I haven't had a chance to, but it's a practice
yes.
based in sort of like Gnostic gospel that
Yes.
involves not ejaculating or not having any sort of like extreme sexual activity, right? Like, and so you're if you waste your semen, or if you have an orgasm, if you're a woman, this is it's such a dopamine release that it takes 2 weeks to recover from, right? That you're
Yes.
in withdrawal from that dopamine for 2 weeks, and it does everything. I mean, Mary Sharp says that it she could price it at $300, because she would, after she would have an orgasm, she would go shopping and spend that much money, or she would be so brain clouded that she would park on the wrong side of the street and get a ticket. This is the sort of expert, the touted expert on the program
Mm-hmm.
um, about porn addiction and children, and why this is so bad. She doesn't say, "Oh yeah, I actually believe that all ejaculation is bad. I believe that all orgasm is bad. My partner and I have not had an orgasm for 7 years
Mm-hmm.
because we practice this weird, this gospel practice."
Yes.
It would instantly discredit her, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Because I think that's like one of the more frustrating things is because so I didn't really know about Carezza until I was on Twitter, and I think it's Dr. Prousey, I think is how she
yeah,
says her
Dr.
name.
Prowse, yeah.
Prousey. I always
I
say her
always say
name wrong.
Prowse, but I don't know. I've never
It's
spoken with her
it's
directly.
yeah, it's not Prouse. You'd think it was, but
Oh,
it's not. So
oh,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it's not actually that's not pronounced. I heard her say it
Okay.
once. I'm pretty sure it was Prousey. But that was where I found out about Carezza, and so I started reading about Carezza, and then I saw that it had gotten some mainstream media attention, but it was framed as like a good thing because it's like bringing like emotional connectedness, right? Because the term
Yeah, like
carezza is
goop.
like Italian for caress or something. And so
Yeah.
it's like, like we're caressing each other and like looking in each other's eyes, and it's all like sensual and romantic. And that's fantastic. I'm not mad
Yeah.
about it. But what they don't tell you is that once you get into it, you're never supposed to have an orgasm again. And I'm like, what the fuck? Wait, what the
Well,
fuck?
I mean, like people can do whatever they want, right? People can do all the tantric sex, all the like, orgasm denial. People can edge. People can put on a chastity cage. I don't fucking care, right? Like, there's all of these different things that you are welcome to do. You're not welcome to say this is based in science, and everybody else has to do what I want, or I'm going to sort of figure out a way to make the culture so that like they believe what I believe, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's just an evangelical thing at that point, right? So like
Yes.
people can do orgasm denial, right? That it happens in kink and fetish all the fucking time.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the same as saying like this other thing. If you choose to do this other thing, it's bad for you and it's bad for society.
Yes. And then, of course, it's like, of course, these people are anti pornography because they think ejaculating or orgasms or climaxing is bad. No wonder they hate
Yeah.
pornography. Like, and like, I don't care if you want to edge for the rest of your life, but it's weird that you're telling people that, like, they're irreparably harming their, like, brain chemistry by having
Yeah.
orgasms. Like,
Yes.
what are we doing here? It's
I mean,
very, very weird.
it is just this. I mean, it's the same goddamn anti-sex impulse that has been part of this culture, from the beginning, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
probably from, shortly after the Romans. Like, once the church came in, right? This idea, this isn't new. What they just do is they sort of dress it up. And, as I was having this argument with this journalist, they were bringing up all of these things. Well, this porn is dirtier than it has ever been, and it's more perverse and extreme. And I was like, girl, I don't know. I was around before. Like, I know what the magazines were. Like
Right.
I'm a porn historian. There's nothing new under the sun, right? In
Nothing.
fact,
Nothing.
like if you talk about it, it's like a percentage of the industry. Most of the industry now is like fucking glamour shots, right? Like
Yeah.
OnlyFans, right? It is mostly nudes, mostly solos, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
is, this is like you can talk about like stuff because it's a little bit more visible, but it's not worse, right? And it's not any different. But this argument that it makes people violent, that it has a effect on your mental health, that it is connected to crimes, that it's purposely being pointed towards children, that it leads to trafficking. These are all things that have been made for 50 fucking years, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not true. They're not based in data. And like these people can pull this out and say, oh, well, this is what this is, and this is very horrible. And I think that because of the sex shame that we all have, internalized anyhow, I think that it's easy for people to say, yeah, I feel weird about this, right? Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
feel uncomfortable about porn. And so if somebody tells me that, like, yeah, it's actually bad for me, there's part of me that's going to believe it, as opposed to just being like, no, it's a positive, it's a sexual exploration, it's people
Yes.
doing sexual expression, like it's a fine, right? It's probably a neutral. I think it's a good, but like we'll call it a draw. But it's not like this sort of it's not this industrial toxic substance that changes the chemistry of your brain. It's a goddamn boob video,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's nothing.
Yes. Also, like just like because I have to go back to the Carezza thing because I actually read
Yeah,
like they have a book from like 100 years ago or something, and I found it's
yeah.
the most sexist shit I've ever seen in my life. Like, and I had to pull this up as we were talking about
Oh,
it
I'm so glad you did.
because oh my wait, have you read the Carezza like
No, no,
handbook?
no, no. I'm really interested
Oh
to
my
hear.
god. Okay, okay, okay. Um, as a rule, the woman's passion, however great, must be subordinated to the man's. He must feel himself being the stronger and more positive of the two and controlling the situation. If the woman takes the lead and is more positive, especially if she assumes this suddenly and unexpectedly, the result is almost always failure.
This is like fucking Andrew Tate. This is like Charlie Kirk,
Right?
right?
Like,
Like this is like
what is this? What is this? Yeah. Yeah, just the passion of a true Carezza, especially of a woman who is perfect in the art. She is then like music, like a poem, not a neurotic.
oh my god.
Fine.
Yeah.
Fine. Like, yeah. The woman may rule in the house and in social life, and it may be very well, but in Carezza, the man must be her chief and her hero. Like, what is
Yeah.
this?
Get up and say that to the BBC, right? Say that at a hearing and see how much respect you get. Like it's
Exactly.
not science. People are welcome to do what they want, And I think that the Carezza thing is interesting. What I've started to think and try to go back to is that like I actually think that the the Carezza proponent. So Mary Sharp is sort of the one who's sort of the most prominent now.
Hmm.
It used to be Gary Wilson. Gary Wilson, had to cite your brain on porn, and it really
Yeah.
had this idea that they really, assembled all the data. He had like I think it was a TEDx talk that went viral, in maybe like 2011, 2013, somewhere around there.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'm beginning to think that the current moment that we are at in terms of like porn addiction, in terms of all these areas, actually can be traced back to this. Like I think that that it's the sort of the pathologization, the medicalization of like pornography viewing and
Hmm.
masturbation. I think comes back in large part to what's happening with Carezza. I always sort of thought of it as like, oh well, the these evangelical groups, these you know National Center on Sexual Exploitation, Nkosi,
Mm-hmm.
and all these other groups were just had found a strategy to say, okay, we're changing our messaging in order to combat porn away from morality and more towards these like
Yeah.
scientific studies with them. That I'm beginning to think that that actually this is the original gospel. Like this is sort of the source material that everyone's like, because for years I didn't pay attention to your brain on porn. I didn't like and this stuff. It would sort of pop up in things, but as I think back on it, like all of the major anti-porn forces,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like the have been really active in the anti-porn movement, things like Fight the New Drug, right,
Right.
and Nkosi and sort of others like that, all reference constantly your brain on porn,
Yeah.
and Gary Wilson and Nkosi, had a memorial up for Gary Wilson when he died,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I really think that I've always sort of treated. I mean, I wasn't really quite aware of Caressa. I know that Dr. Prousey will say is has sort of like flagged it, and I sort of seen it in passing. I wasn't really totally invested in it, or didn't do much digging until the past couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do actually think that like we probably can trace a lot of this back, and I think that
Yeah.
there needs to be more attention paid to it because it's so ludicrous, and
Mm-hmm.
it disguises itself as science. Like they love a footnote, and they love like, oh, say like, but I think that and I was, like I said, I wasn't even aware of. I knew that Gary Wilson was involved in Your Brain on Porn. I knew he was like a bit of a wackadoo, but I didn't really know about the Caressa stuff.
Right.
And like it just makes so much more sense, right? Like if your whole thing is like society, like Mary thinks that it can contribute to terrorism,
Mm-hmm.
right? That orgasms and the withdrawal of the 2 weeks after your orgasm can contribute to terrorism. Um, then of course, then you want to change society, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that nobody's having orgasms.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, I think that's definitely a very valid point because a lot of people, and even we kind of like said it here, is that a lot of people are just like, well, whatever gets you off sexually, as long as everyone's an adult and everyone's consenting, whatever.
Yeah,
Like if you did chastity cage, you never want to orgasm again, fine, whatever. But that's the thing. The other side does not have that same approach. They're like, no,
yeah,
everything will be done the way we said it's going to be done, and you don't get to say whatever, And I think that's like one of the things where we falter a little bit is because we're like,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, if it makes you happy, then do that. Whereas they're like,
yeah,
no, we will tell you what makes you happy, and that's the only thing you can do. And
yes,
I think that like we sometimes don't always like appreciate the seriousness of the other side who is opposing us, that like no, they really do want to enforce their will on everybody. There is no whatever works for you in your bedroom, like that. They're
yeah,
far past that point. you know and I do think it's
no,
also worth noting about things like Careza and Your Brain on Porn being like redone as science because it's bad
yeah,
science. But what fascinates me about a lot of these movements is that because it's pseudoscience, that it
yeah,
also like ties in with other avenues of pseudoscience, like weird white supremacy, eugenics, anti-Semitism
yeah,
stuff. And
yeah,
like that was, I think, one of the weirdest things when I really started paying attention. Thank you, Dr. Prousey. Um, was that she was talking about some of the like the no fap boards in different places where it was like a bunch of men who were like, I'm gonna stop
mhm,
watching porn, I'm gonna stop masturbating. But the stuff that they were saying was just like, this, we've gone past the point of not masturbating. You're saying really weird shit right now. Where they're
yeah,
like the Jews created porn to defile the minds of Western men, and I'm like, what,
yeah,
what the fuck, what, you know? And I also wish that like there was more, like a lot of that was made more publicly aware, just so like
yeah,
people could see how just out of left field this stuff is, and how nonsensical it is, and how pseudoscience it is, right? Because like in any other context, if you were to say that, oh yeah, the Jews created a thing to make men weak and masturbate, everyone would look at you and be like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
yeah,
And justifiably
yeah,
so. But people don't understand that that's something that's happening regularly in these spaces. So it's like, and now like you have the ties into like white supremacy, you have the ties into
Hmm.
eugenics, you have the ties into like people who are now getting drafted to the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and things like that. And then like, to go back how we started this conversation, when you said like you'll be in these rooms like talking about this legislation and you might have a QAnon and an Oath Keeper, this is how we
Yeah,
got here. Like
yeah,
this is
yeah,
how that
yeah.
happened, you know?
And this idea, I mean, it has real effects. I mean, so the anti-masturbation rhetoric, is an essential component of fascist and authoritarian movements, right? Like like it is, the Proud Boys do not masturbate, right? They're allowed one ejaculation, I think, every 30 days,
Oh
and it
God.
has to be in the presence of a woman, and she has to be at least like 10 feet close to you or something like that.
What?
Like yes, I mean, like they have an anti-masturbation um like requirement, right?
Uh-huh.
And as to go back to like the Nazis, right? And this idea of like um s- uh subjugating your body, like basically like that your body, I mean, this goes even to like the Elon Musk sort of like birth rate, right? That you
Hmm.
are wasting your seed, right? That you are like all the stuff that Careza is talking about keeping the semen within you and stuff like that. All of that is like it's not new, right? It's an essential component to so many of these movements,
Hmm.
and it's also it's also just not fictional, right? Like it sounds ludicrous to say, okay, well, the Jews run the porn industry, and they're doing it to weaken the white male males by
Hmm.
turning them into betas, because masturbation turns you into a beta, because you're not preserving your semen, your masculine energies, and it encourages white women to have sex with black men, thus race mixing and weakening the white race. Right? This
Hmm.
seems all sort of like cartoonish and like, okay, this is like some weird message board. But it also is this weird reversal for genders, right? Like, and I think that a lot of this, um, is born out of the growth of sites like OnlyFans and things like that.
Hmm.
As well as sort of like gains made in the feminist movement. But like this idea that like men feel really weak having to pay a woman for nudes,
Yeah.
right? Like there's this imbalance where they are really bent out of shape about it,
Hmm.
right? The idea that like, who is this bitch? Why do I have to pay her? Like I should be getting this for free. Like this sort of like
Hmm.
sense of entitlement. And I think that this messaging, right, both the racial messaging and the gender messaging have such um real world effects
Hmm.
as to like how people treat each other, right? And like the conversations that we see around Andrew Tate, or like you know Nick Fuentes, or Tim Pool, or any of these people who are talking about like masculine energy and having to dominate women and like I think that a lot of it just comes from like this. I don't think that it's a I don't think that it's a uh, coincidence that it comes at a time where women um, are in control of what they do with their bodies, and
Hmm.
in terms of being able to like monetize men, and these discussions about findom and pay pigs, and these narratives about like their sexuality controls you, right? Like
Yeah.
I think that like a lot of this happens at this time in part because of like, again, it's a reactionary movement based on the fact that like things have switched,
Yeah.
and they don't just have power over you.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I agree 100% with that. And it's it's so interesting that there's like a what's the word that their own ideology is like contradictory, because on the one hand they're like we should be allowed to like essentially own women's autonomy and women should do what we say, but at the same time they're like all women should be like unspoiled virgins who,
Yeah.
and it's like you like you can't do both of those things at the same time. Like you can't actually argue
Yeah.
that, women have to remain pure for you, but then also argue that you have a right to essentially fuck any woman you want at any time
Yeah.
because she's entitled to do that for you. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, and I feel like that's tied a lot with sex work too, not like pornography specifically, but like in-person sex work, where one of the things that strikes me about having a situation where we have criminalized sex work throughout most of the United States is that it still puts power and money back in the hands of men, right? So, like, if you're
Hmm.
doing sex work and you get arrested, most likely your arresting officer is going to be a man. Most
Hmm.
likely your judge is going to be a man. When you have to pay fines, it's going to be to a court system that's like predominantly staffed by men. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so, like, I've always felt like a big part of punishing sex work is like redistributing the wealth and autonomy back to men, like where it was supposed
Yeah.
to be, like the whole
Yeah.
time, allegedly. But yeah, I find these things to be like very, very interconnected in that aspect. And yeah, a lot of it is, I think, that they don't like the fact that women have more autonomy than they used to, and that they are threatened by women having autonomy, because I think that, and I talk about this a lot when I talk about like the male loneliness epidemic, is like, you're lonely because you suck. like, like honestly. And people be like, oh, but don't you feel bad? And it's like, it's not that I don't feel bad, but like, only you can fix you. I can't make
Well,
you care about you. Like, you are the one who is choosing to only see women as transactional
yeah.
relationships. You're the one who is choosing to see women as only something worth fucking or marrying or bearing children for you, as opposed to being an autonomous person who has their own hopes and dreams and desires that you can build a partnership with. Like, you're doing this to you. Like, I can't fix that for you. But yeah, I think that that's very much tied into things where it's seen as women having autonomy by being able to do OnlyFans, by being able to do, pornography, by being able to to find ways to make money outside of traditional norms. I think that's a very
Yeah.
big thing, is like, you are not allowed to make money outside of traditional norms. Like, you either have to, like, be a housekeeper, or you have to be a wife. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of overlap between those things in these people's minds.
Well, you get like, you talk about like, right, the like, if you think about like in-person work, right, and and violence against sex workers, right, and how much of it is sort of geared in this sort of like power imbalance that men find themselves in, that they're having to pay,
Yeah.
right, that they are not the dominant, it somehow renders them, weaker or lesser, and I
Hmm.
think that like the stuff that, the male loneliness epidemic, like, absolutely right. You're talking about things where, um, like, these are the same people who are saying like, "Hey, meritocracy only," right? And like, no DEI, and like, what are these
Hmm.
special privileges and all those? But they're not flourishing in the marketplace of ideas,
No,
right?
no.
Like they can't get laid, and so they're like, "Oh, well, we better force women to do this other thing."
Hmm.
Because I can't get them otherwise. And like, it's just because they're bitches. And it's like they've all been sold this grift, right? The grift, because that's like the grift of like male power and
Yeah.
male dominance. You're like, yes, you pay for, the houses of these podcast guys. You pay, like, you're supporting this sort of fictional lifestyle with these cars and all the rest of it. But like,
Hmm.
what they're doing is draining you. Like, you're the
Yeah.
fucking pay pig. You're the pay pig for Andrew Tate,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yes.
he has got you thinking that you are fucking weak and like a loser, and you can't do it, and you won't have it unless you have all of these things. But it's a fucking fantasy.
Hmm.
Like, it's that's what's causing all of this.
Yes.
I mean, at least in part. And I think that like being able to say like, oh no, I need to find myself in a way where like it is not transactional, or if like there's a transactional that like she's getting what she wants too, or
Hmm.
whatever. Like it's like that you are like you're bringing something to the table, and it's not just the fact that you are a man.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that, because I was literally just posting about this the other day. I think yesterday. I don't know. This morning, maybe. I don't know. I post a lot. It's a problem. But
Oh
with
God.
with like the tariff situation, how a bunch of these like male podcasters, influencers, manfluencers, whatever you want to call them,
Yeah.
have been telling men for years that like, you are entitled to the best of everything and you deserve it and you should be able to treat yourself, and if you don't have what you want, it's because like a DEI stole your future
Yeah.
from you,
Yeah.
you know, like,
Yeah.
and then they were all like, vote Trump because he's bringing back masculinity, he's bringing back your rights, he's bringing back the future that you're entitled to. And now with the tariffs in the last 24 hours, they're like, real men don't need stuff. You don't need to buy stuff. You don't need money. You can be poor. It builds character. Build some character.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, how do you not see this as the grift that it is? You know, and
No.
it's so wild to me because they'll argue that it's putting them in an awkward position to pay a woman for a service, but then they'll
Yeah.
willingly make some asshole into a millionaire and give him a bunch of clout on social media because misogyny, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't really
It's just
understand.
it doesn't, and I've got a post-it on my computer that I will occasionally put on social media. It just says, "Do not expect them to be ideologically consistent in any
Yes.
way." Right?
Mhm.
Like, and I have to struggle with it every day because you do want to say, "Well, this makes no sense," But like Madonna Whore never made any sense,
Yeah.
right? Like it was always a set that where you're just like, and at the end of the day, like we imagine that they're going to think, well, this doesn't make sense. But like they don't care. What they care about is like, I'm winning and I'm getting this thing. And it
Yes.
doesn't matter if it's the fucking Constitution or the fucking Bible or, a conservative, traditionally conservative economic plan or, ideas about meritocracy. They don't care about that.
Yep.
Right? They care about winning. It is a zero sum game. And it is like, I win, and this is how Trump operates too, right? Like, I mean, I've never met a group of billionaires who are so aggrieved at how the world has wronged them and how like they have how it's how everything is stacked against them,
Mhm.
right? Like, and you would think that you'd be like, oh, for years all I heard was victim culture, right? The left's
Yeah.
victim culture. Oh, they think everything is so bad for them. And then you've got a president who's just like, oh no, they're taking advantage of us. They're raping us. Yes, us, the richest country in the world. Us with the,
Mhm.
until a few weeks ago, right? The strongest economy in the world,
Yep.
right? With all of the military power, and like yet it's always like, oh, and it's because they think if someone else is winning, we must be losing. So there's
Yeah.
no win-win. And I think that you see this in politics, you see this with the tariffs, and you see this with this the male loneliness epidemic, right? Like
Mhm.
if that there can't be a situation where we both do well.
Yep.
Right? If someone else is doing well, it means that they're taking something from me and I'm losing. And
Yeah.
it's just this sort of way of looking at the world that is so foreign to me, right?
Mhm.
Like certainly I get jealous when people are successful, don't get me wrong. But like in reality, it's not like, oh, that person got one over on me because they're happy and I am not.
Mhm.
But they look at it and I think that that's it. And so but the inverse of that is like if I can tear them down, if I can dominate them, I will, I'll get some power from them, or
Yes.
I'll find
Yes.
happiness. I've never met a more unhappy bunch of people,
Mhm.
and a more aggrieved bunch of people who have so goddamn much. And if anything, I mean, it does. I mean, maybe I'm going to start to agree with the manfluencers who are being like, money doesn't matter, because I'm sort of like, if this is what it gets you, what a fucking misery.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that because I really do see them behaving in that way. And I think what's fascinating to me is also that like once they start winning, they end up accruing so much, especially like the ultra wealthy. They've accrued so much, but like they're still not happy, and it's like, like how does that work? Like you can, and I think like I look at someone like Elon Musk, right? Like I do not understand his behavior at all. Like he's out here like
Yeah.
complaining on Twitter that like people don't like him. Because let me tell, like if I was a multimillionaire, I would be Enya. Okay,
Yeah,
because like
exactly.
Enya has a castle in Ireland and like 15 cats and a housekeeper, and
Yeah,
if I had
yeah,
money, I would also have 15 cats and a castle with a
yeah.
housekeeper. Because like there's nothing you could do that would piss me off. There's nothing you could do
Yes.
that would upset me. I would be on the beach every day, like drinking a mimosa. Like I would be
No,
like Like, I just don't
I mean,
understand having all that and still being so unhappy, you know? And
yeah,
the and really, I think that you nailed it when you said this idea that like if someone else gets like an ounce of rights, that somehow like you've taken something away from them. It's like, but you already had more than you were ever going to use. You already
yeah,
had more social, like you had more social clout and social media presence than anyone ever needed. You have so much money, you'll literally never run out of money. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like, because people be like, oh, we're doing the Tesla thing, and like Elon lost like, $300 million. He's still a billionaire. He's still a
yeah,
billionaire. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have so much that like you like you're overstocked,
yeah,
and they're still like,
exactly.
but no, I have to squeeze like that last Beanie Baby in my storage locker
Yeah.
because I can't let you have it. And it's just like, why are you like this? Like, what is wrong with you?
It's like a weird hole in your soul that like is never fulfilled, right? Like you're like, I just have to have more, and I have to have power, and I have to dominate, and it's got to be so exhausting,
Yeah,
like
and I think that like at the end of the day, they know that they only want these things because they're not capable of having healthy relationships with other humans.
yeah,
Like whether that's like someone who pays Andrew Tate or it is Andrew Tate.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
like these people are not. I think that they know that, and I think that that is like what really. I think that's what irks them the most is like because you can have a bunch of poor people, and it's like the Grinch, right? Where
yeah,
after he like ruins Christmas and like all the Who's come out and they're still like, well, still Christmas, gonna sing our song and hold
yeah,
hands and like whatever, and he's like, what?
yeah,
How? But I
yeah.
took your
That's
stuff.
exactly
Why are you happy? And it seems like it's a lot of that, where they just can't imagine, um, that people are still being able to be happy while being repressed. And I think that
yeah,
also ties into their need for like further repression to be like, oh, well, you seem happy and I don't like it, so let me make it worse for you. Like, let me
yeah.
implement more bad policies. Let me try to strip more of your civil rights. Let me try to, find new ways to harm you. But like, if you're cool, you're cool.
Yeah. Well,
They're
that's
just
like the
not.
motivation if you think about it behind like the anti-sex work stuff too, right? Is that like you have all these people that are like the people are saying, I mean, and sex workers are generally very upfront, about like what is work and what they enjoy about it and what they don't enjoy about it, and how it ranks on other things, and whether it's survival work or like whether it's high-end escorting or whatever, right? Like people
Mhm.
are fairly nuanced. But the anti-sex work groups are like, whatever you are saying offends us, and we must take away your rights so that you will be actually unhappy,
Yeah.
right? Like if you are like voicing this, that you're in any way that this in any way works for you, or fits our needs, it doesn't fit ours, and so we're going to have to make it so that like your work is more dangerous, that you
Yes.
have fewer rights, right? We're going to have to find a way to do it because we just can't, like like the Whoville, right? It's such a good thing of like, we're doing it, we're making this work however we're making it work, for good or bad. um and they're like, no, we cannot stand it. We have
Mhm.
to find a way to poison the water.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just I I guess I'll just never understand it because I have never hated another group of people so much that like I want to take their human rights away. So like you know, so in that aspect like I just don't get it.
Yeah,
But and that really is a thing, and one of the things I see a lot, especially like online, a lot of swerfs and people who are anti-sex work, one of the things they love to do is show up in a thread and talk about empowerment, right?
yeah,
So like anytime someone shows up talking about empowerment, it's not the sex workers. And it's
yeah,
like, why is that exactly? And they're like, well, but you're not empowered, therefore it's not real work. But you're not empowered, therefore you can't enjoy
yeah,
it. You're not empowered, therefore it's bad. And it's like, are you empowered with what you do
yeah,
every day?
yeah,
But yeah, just the wanting someone else to be miserable, and not just wanting them to be miserable, like, but literally going out of your way to advocate for laws and policies to make them miserable.
yeah.
It's really
And it's,
a bizarre thing to me.
yeah, like disbelieving that it could be a positive choice for anyone, or a
Hmm.
positive choice given the range of choices, right? Like, that this may be the best solution for me,
Hmm.
and some people may really enjoy it, and some people be doing survival work, but it may be better than the alternative,
Right.
right? That they're dealing with. And for them, because it offends their morality and because it's something that they could never imagine themselves doing, it has to be, again, like, well, you can't be, I don't, happy is not the right term, but you can't be fine with this,
Right.
right? You can't be, you've got to be sad that you've lost Christmas, or the Christian blessing, whatever it is that the Christian heteronormative, approval or whatever. Like,
Yes.
we have to take this away from you, and we have to like make it so that you're miserable. Like, it's just like you said, it's not an inclination I have with anybody else, where you're like, no, if you're happy with it, it's fine. If
Hmm.
if this is something that you're fine with and it's affecting you and not anybody else, like, I'm go with God, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna, like, you can practice whatever sort of like Christian kink that you have, and you could go live on a farm and have 18 babies and like, you know,
Yes.
like, not take medicine. I don't care. Like, go, go and do it. It's not going to affect me. But like, can you imagine if you and I showed up in Idaho and started lecturing women that they weren't liberated?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
this was bad for them, and like, well, like, no, what you're there for is like for the woman that comes out of like the 18-year, Latter Day Saints, uh, Christian dominion and religion, and like doesn't have a credit score and doesn't have any money and
Yep.
has escaped her abusive husband. You're like, hey, how can we help?
Hmm.
We're not like, oh, actually, we don't think that this is good, so we're actually going to give your husband more power over you so that you can really learn a lesson that
Yep.
this arrangement that you're in is actually worse.
Yes.
Like, you should be a lesson to other women. Like, we're going to have to like put your head on a pike. Like, it's also crazy and dumb.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I just don't understand the bloodlust behind it really. Whereas
Yeah,
like, but I want to see people hurt, but I want to see people suffer, and especially people who don't behave in ways that I deem to be socially acceptable, right? So of course sex
yeah,
workers are like always at the top of that list, right? And then when you add in like the other demographics that like cross up with sex workers, right? We have a lot of like trans folks who do sex work. We have a lot of, like non-gender conforming folks who do sex work. We have a lot of women who do sex work. We have a lot of non-white people, immigrants,
yeah,
people who are poor who do sex work. And it's like,
yeah,
and then you start adding in all this stuff, and it's like the more gleeful they get about their sadism to be like, oh, you're
yeah,
really not behaving the way we want you to. So like, let's
yeah,
exacerbate, every
yeah,
possible like negative thing that we can do to you. And it's just very frustrating because it's tiring to have to like argue for your humanity all the time. To be like, hey,
yeah,
maybe just because like I did sex work doesn't mean that I should, be murdered and left in a ditch
yeah,
somewhere. Like, I don't know. Wow. I'm just
yeah.
throwing that out there. That's a possibility.
I mean, the
Um,
thing is that what they think is, and like, I was slow to sort of realize this, but like, having spent a lot of time, like, they really think that anybody who, I used to think, which was sort of like a moral thing. They didn't like you, right? They didn't think it was appropriate because it was against the Bible or it was against their own morality or things like that. What I hear over and over and over is them basically saying things like, my husband sees these things on the internet and he's going to expect like a blowjob. He's going to expect it at home,
mhm,
right? The access to sex work, that sex workers are actively harming their relationships. This is
mhm,
what they believe. I'm not saying that it's true, but the idea that like someone else in the world would do this thing that their husband fantasizes about, or that they imagine their husband fantasizes
mhm.
about, they take as a direct attack on them
Yes.
because they are going to feel less than, or they are going to feel pressured to do that. And, as we're saying, right, like, we talk about consent all the time, and we talk about like boundaries and like what you should be able to do, what you should be able to, and that should be the guideline. But they're like, actually, we're uncomfortable with that. We just don't want anybody to have any ideas. We don't actually like having sex with our husbands, or we
Mhm.
don't like doing these things, or our husband, pushes these things, so we're going to externalize it. And so the very existence of, I mean, it's sort of like a variation on like homophobia or transphobia, right?
Mhm.
Which is this idea of like you existing in this space, and enjoying your life and being fulfilled and is somehow a threat to me because I don't have that control.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like I see someone out there, expressing gender in a way that is non-traditional, and like I've invested so much in this version of like gender conformity and
Mm-hmm.
and then men versus women and like the gender roles and things like that. That this is a threat to me because it sort of tears apart all like it lays bare all of the sacrifices that I have made to fit
Yes.
into this narrow box. And you can
Yes.
go out there and do this. And the same with sexuality. Like you're going out there and you're getting gangbanged and you're having fun and you're taking loads and you are, like doing all of this fun stuff, right? And I have had this very narrow thing of this, and like maybe I fantasize about that a little bit, but I buried it and internalized it and been like, that's disgusting, and we need to stop those people from doing that. Like it's all such a weird, like complex psychological psychodrama,
Mm-hmm.
that like you're like it's not like somehow everything that and I guess this goes back sort of like the Trump and the zero sum game and all this, like everything that someone else is enjoying is somehow a threat to you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people have that interpretation, especially women who don't do sex work feel that way about sex workers. And it's like so fascinating to me um, because a lot of them blame, like, they'll blame sex work or they'll blame pornography, but they mean that in like very modern terms. And I'm just always like, so do you think if this was, 1925, that your husband wouldn't be cheating on you? Like
Yeah,
if it was 1825, 1625,
yeah, yeah.
1425, like please pick a century in which you know
When
what
did
I'm
this
saying?
start? Yeah,
Yeah,
when did misogyny start? When did extramarital affairs start? Right? When did abuse start?
exactly.
Like,
And and it's like so frustrating with people like, well, I'm blaming sex work, and it's like, and even that, like, I find there to be like an inherent level of misogyny there, because it's like, so you're blaming women for the behavior of men, though,
yeah,
at the end of the
yeah,
day, is what you're really saying,
yes,
you know. And it's just like so fascinating to me that people will cling to these sort of vestiges of polite society as if it's going to save them. And it's like, but it's never saved you. It didn't save your mother. It didn't save your grandmother. It didn't
no,
save your great grandmother. You know what I mean? Um, like it just these things don't work, and yet people cling to them to be like, but if I just follow the rules, and if I dress the right way, and if I'm just modest enough, and if I'm
yeah,
good enough, that like I'll be safe. And and it's like that's not how it works actually.
yeah,
You can't if you're if you have the um, disfortune of being in the presence of an abuser, then you're at risk of abuse no matter how you behave. And that's not because of you, that's because you're in the presence of an abuser.
yeah,
And it seems like a lot of these women don't understand that. And so they want to blame everything else but the people doing the actual abuse. And so it's like super
yes,
frustrating to me that people be like, oh, it's sex work's fault that we have misogyny. Oh, it's sex work's fault that we have rape culture. And it's like, yeah, no, actually, sex work is not why we have those things at all. At all.
yeah.
You know?
And it's like, these things are like societal, right? And they articulate themselves, through whatever avenues they have. So if you want to critique, if you want to like find something to critique, as misogynist, take your pick, right? Like you can find any aspect of society and say, oh, this is misogynist. But it's only when you're talking about really porn and sex work that you decide that that is the defining factor,
Right.
right? And that it is different than anything else. And it's not, as like I got asked on by this journalist the other day, he was like, um, well, don't you think your industry, is bad people in it or something. I can't remember what the sort of phrasing was,
Hmm.
but it was basically like, don't you think there are people who are, really terrible in porn? And I said, well, there's people terrible in all industries, right? This is not
Right.
something that is unique to this. There are bad actors in real estate and, et cetera. Well, yeah, but they take, those industries, take care of it and they self-regulate and they do that. And I was like, do they?
That's
Does like
so because
does Toll Brothers take care of the slumlord? Right? Do they,
hmm
they they make sure that that's not being done? Like, do you as a fucking podcaster go after Nick Fuentes? Like, are you patrolling that?
right.
Are you responsible for what somebody else is doing? I was like, we all should be working at this, but it is this idea that like, yeah, that somehow this the existence of bad actors is the defining part of housing. And you could argue that like slumlords are a defining factor of like the rental market, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or of, maybe of housing in a capitalist society more broadly. But like nobody does that, right? Like that's not something that the media seizes on, or that you're going to be asked on a mainstream news show or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's only when it comes to sex that they decide that the worst part of it is the defining factor, and everything else, all the fucking millions of goddamn like boobs that get taken pictures of, per day are, they're nothing. That's not the real thing. The real thing is this sort of dark and worse, like this weird sort of like sex with animals or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so interesting because you said that this was on the BBC interview that someone was saying this to you.
Yeah.
Because there's because I found this on BBC a while ago. Is like, did you know that there's like a class action lawsuit against McDonald's in the UK?
No.
Yeah, there's literally like 600 employees suing for like sexual harassment. But don't worry, the industry takes care of itself. Like,
like literally, yeah, you saw Burger King come in and like issue a decree, right? Like Burger King put McDonald's in jail.
yeah,
Like,
and so yeah, it's like extra interesting that people are like, well, this only happens here. But then again, I think that goes back to like the deluding yourself into safety. Because like, as long as
yeah,
I'm not a sex worker, I'll be safe. Because I see this all the time. People online like, well, sex work isn't work because like, if I was at a regular job, you don't expect to be sexually harassed. And I was like, I expect to be sexually harassed in every workplace I've been in
yeah,
because I have been sexually harassed in every workplace I've ever been in.
yeah, yeah,
I've been a waitress. I've worked in an office. I was a phlebotomist. Like, yeah, I have experienced sexual harassment everywhere. But like pretending, and I feel like that also does like a disadvantage too, because you're telling people that like as long as you're not a sex worker, you're going to be safe. But the world that we live in, like with
yeah,
misogyny and racism and homophobia and transphobia and all these things, like you're never really guaranteed safety anywhere. So I find it to be really disingenuous to argue that like as long as you're not doing sex work, you'll be safe, as if there aren't
yeah.
like all sorts of abuses that happen to workers in every industry everywhere. So I
Yeah.
find that to be like just particularly infuriating, honestly.
Yeah, and like firstly, the idea that like this thing of like, oh well, it's paid rape, right? And so, which sex work is paid rape, and so you're like, okay, well, so now you've given cover to say like, there's no differentiation, there's no consent,
Hmm.
right? Or you can't consent because it's whatever. And you're like, well, okay, now you've just excused anybody who does want to rape somebody,
Right.
right? Like if it does want to abuse a sex worker, right? Does want to violate consent.
Hmm.
You've given them cover because that's what this is, right? There's no difference between it.
Yep.
So it has like it has both effects, right? It sort of like creates this imagined world where like it doesn't happen to women all the fucking time, in the media, in the McDonald's, right, in the office, and then also this other one where like these people aren't worth anything, and you can do whatever you want to them because you paid that money, and they
Hmm.
they don't have any right to complain. They really shouldn't speak up because everything that they do is paid for.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that frustrates me about that take is like a lot of times I'll see it come from people who claim that they want to like protect sex workers or help
Yeah,
sex workers. And they'll say this, and it's like, but if you actually think it's paid rape and I don't have any consent, then like if I were to report something and the police
yeah,
were to take it seriously and the abuser or attacker did get arrested and go to trial, I could not trust you to sit on that jury and come back with a guilty verdict because you didn't think I had consent in the first place.
yeah.
And like,
No, I mean,
you know,
and I think it's your fault. I mean, I think that this is to go back to this idea of like this sort of Jezebel idea, right?
hmm,
That like that their men are being lured,
yeah,
right? That it's not their fault. So like the sort of third aspect is that like whether it's pornography or sex work or something else, like it's this narrative of like he was fine until you did this,
hmm,
and so you're both responsible for his violence, you
yes,
know, and like and for the sort of the sort of societal decay, right? That it's like, oh no, he wouldn't have done this if this weren't an option. And
right,
so we just have to like have this like weird fascist thing where we would take it away from an option. We have to make your life miserable. We have to take away your rights because none of them are arguing that like, hey, police shouldn't be able to do this,
Mm-hmm.
or that we need to have stronger protections for sex workers against, police harassment and abuse,
Yes.
or like it's just, I mean, again, I'm looking at my sticker about like not expecting them to be ideologically consistent, and yet here I am trying to argue for logic.
No, because no, I think it's like very normal to advocate for logic because you're like, okay, there's two, and there's
Yeah.
two, so we all agree four, right? Like four. You know?
And they're like, "Shut up, whore!"
I'm like,
Like,
shut
get
up,
out of
it's
here.
five, you stupid slut. Like, oh, all right, it's
Like,
five,
get
I
out of
guess. I
here.
don't
Like,
know.
burn.
But yeah, no, I absolutely get that, and I don't know necessarily how to change it because it's because that's the thing. It's not a logical change. It's an internal
Yeah,
transformation that these people need to go through, and a lot of them just don't want to take the work to do it, to really like sit down and address. Because how many of these people who say that sex work is paid rape, and if it wasn't for sex workers, like men wouldn't be out here raping people? How
yeah,
many of them think that spousal rape isn't a real thing? You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
So it's like,
yeah,
I mean, you know,
yeah,
I think that you just have a lot of really bad ideas about consent, is what I think is
yeah,
actually happening here. And you're taking it out on sex workers, or people who'll be like, you shouldn't do sex work because it's degrading. And then, like, they'll say nothing as, someone like a single mom or a single dad is out here working like 3 jobs at minimum wage trying to make
yeah,
ends meet. Like, that's not fucking,
yeah.
that's fucking degrading too.
Deport
You
them.
know, and
Like,
it's but yeah, and I think like this is because this is just like my own like personal pet theory. One of the things I've thought for a very long time is that in particular women who hate the sex work industry, I think a lot of them hate it because they can't degrade sex workers the way that they want to
mhm,
without directly being clients, and they don't want to be
yeah,
clients for obvious reasons. But it's like, yeah, because you can't treat a sex worker in person the way that you treat your barista or the person who
yeah,
cleans your house or the person your kids daycare teacher or whatever.
yeah,
Because like there is like a lot of internalized hierarchy with these people where like you're allowed to treat certain people badly, and I think
yeah,
that it just enrages them that they can't treat sex workers the way that they want to because they aren't
yeah,
actually clients or customers.
yeah,
And so it's like that, like I think like they're like simmering in that, and like it makes it worse at the end of the day for
yeah,
them. Because I'm like, oh, if I was your customer, I could call you names and hit you or whatever.
yeah,
Like treat you the way that you deserve to be treated, but I'm not a customer,
yeah,
so I can't do that. And I think that
yeah,
like there's a lot of like that in it because there's a lot of malice happening
yeah, yeah.
with anti-sex work
There
positions.
is. I mean, the thing that I try to figure out, is sort of how do we change it, right? And like,
Yeah.
what are effective avenues? Because, like, I, you know, I like to argue with people, not because I think that it's productive necessarily. I think that, as we were talking about with the legislative, like, maybe 1 in 10 times, maybe 1 in 20 times, it like flips somebody. Um, but I do think that it makes you a stronger advocate.
Uh-huh.
Like people always like, why are you arguing with these people online? On Twitter especially, I used to
Yes.
love to get into it and be like, it would drive me nuts, and I
Mhm.
had to like create systems to like make sure that I wasn't looking at social media on after I clocked out or whatever. Because you're just like
Yes.
obsessed. Well, they wrote this and now I've got to get back at them. You know,
Mhm.
but I do think like it is helpful, even if it's not going to convert those people, right? Maybe 1 in 20 times it changes their mind when you sort of have that conversation or you're able to point things out.
Mhm.
I think that most of opinion is driven by sort of like societal shifts and like
Yes.
so I think that a lot of the stuff that when I'm getting into an argument with a Christofascist, or I'm getting in an argument with like a swerve or something like that, um like it actually helps draw out some of the conversations that maybe won't affect them, but will affect somebody who's a little bit closer to me,
Yeah.
right? Or a little
Yeah.
bit sort of more in line ideologically, who still has some of these issues, right? A lot of people have ick issues, right?
Mhm.
Around porn, around sex work, around, trans, around gay. Like I understand this is a political thing. And so I think that it helps that. And I think that I always think of it in terms of like concentric circles, and like I may not get that outer rung, they may be lost to me,
Mhm.
like they may be useful for me in terms of arguing with them, but like it might be good for people who are not that far out but closer to me, who see that argument and sort of understand the conversation a little bit, or the people that I'm going to talk to for legislative work who are maybe allied organizations, right? Like that it helps to have those conversations with people like maybe like Planned Parenthood, maybe who might say, well, I don't know, maybe this isn't our issue, or maybe it's the Democratic Party or something, like to be able to have that, because I think that you know a lot of people sort of fall in line once once the conventional wisdom is, oh, this is okay or this is bad. And I think
Yeah.
that we see that right now with like this shift in politics, right? How many people suddenly went to the right, or how many people like Gavin Newsom were like, oh, the wind's changed, I am anti-trans now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that like that's stuff that's done by a million different little steps, right?
Yeah.
How we switch it back, how we turn it back, isn't necessarily that I'm going to win over a Nikosi, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to win over Mary Sharp. But if I can start to move people a little bit more towards it, eventually we sort of have the majority again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eventually we have people think like, oh, I do see it this way. And so I don't think that it's entirely pointless. And I do like going and talking to legislatures, and I do like talking to hostile press, because I think that there's always somebody, there's going to be people in there who think, maybe it's somebody who's listening to the program, even though I don't think I did a great job on the podcast, like who think, oh, well, that is a good point, or that
Mm-hmm.
is all of that stuff. And I think that the work that we do, whether it's one-on-one with a person, or whether it is, something grander, like it all sort of piles in the same way that protests pile in, the same way that phone calls to legislators pile in. Like
Right.
these are small things that feel like a drop in the bucket, but like ultimately that's what fills the bucket.
Right, exactly, exactly. It's what is it? The straw that broke the camel's back. We just
Yeah,
need a lot of
yeah,
straws.
yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, no, I have to say,
Plastic ones.
I have to say, I've been finding some success with that. Actually, one of the things that I find, especially right now in this climate, is like talking about sex workers' rights, especially in terms of LGBTQ rights and women's rights, because
Mhm.
it's like, again, like, hey, you don't like being surveilled because you're trying to leave your state to get an abortion. Let me
Yeah,
tell you where that surveillance started. It started with sex workers. You
yeah,
know what I mean? So like that sort of thing, to be like, we really are in this together. We really sort of, whether you like it or not, we're on the same team. You know?
yeah. And
So it's
we have a
like,
lot to fucking do,
yeah,
right? Like this is it. Like what, like what happened to sex workers is happening to you now, and what's happening to sex workers now is going to happen to you. So
yes.
listen, like these are authorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are an authority on these things.
Yeah, and I'm
Um,
seeing it too with like all of the immigration stuff that's going on, where it's like you can't get into the country, out of the country. Hey, you know who has experience with that? Sex workers, you know?
yeah.
Um, you want to
Who
talk
had their
about,
social media feeds searched, right? Who
yes,
had like facial recognition applied to them, to go
yes,
through it
yes. Yeah, and
for years. Like this is like such an old thing, and yet like, yeah, everybody's getting it now.
mm-hmm. And it's like, so, and I, wish that like there was more solidarity with sex workers, because it's like, hey, if you want people who have experience, have already lived through this, and can maybe give you some good insights, like talk to sex workers.
Yeah,
Um, really, really do. And I wish more people were there, but I have started seeing like a little bit of progress. Where it's sort of like the unfortunate bedfellows, right? We're like, I don't like being on your team, but I get
yeah,
we're on the same team, so I guess we can work together for now. you
yeah,
know? And it's like, but if that's what it is, then that's what it is. And if that's what it takes, then that's what we'll do, because we're all in trouble right now, really. Like, most people are at more risk than they realize right now in the
yeah,
socio-political climate. And it's
yeah,
like, how can we mitigate those harms and mitigate those damages as much as possible? So that's kind of like where I'm at mentally with the
yeah,
whole thing. You
yeah,
know.
yeah. I mean, like, I like, I'm curious for you. Like, obviously, these are um, very very challenging times for all of us.
Yes.
I'm curious as to like how you, on a personal level, sort of deal with it. Like how, like how much you choose to engage and how much not, because so much of it is a direct attack,
Yeah.
right? Like emotionally, like how do like I'm curious as to other people's strategies for like staying above water.
Like mentally.
mentally. Yeah, yeah.
Um, I I have no idea. I have no idea. Um, no, I mean, I tried to like I mean, I did some of the basic stuff. Like the only app I have on my phone is Blue Sky, so like I literally have to
Oh,
pull out the laptop if I want to get on any other social media at
oh, that's
all.
great.
Yeah, like so I've been posting less in other places. I think that's good for my stress levels.
Yeah.
Um really just like getting back to community I think is really important right now. One of the things that we're doing is like starting up like a monthly meetup like over Zoom for sex workers just to be like, hey, let's just like chill for like an hour on
Hmm.
Saturday, just to remind because I think a big part of why this is so stressful is because it feels isolating, right?
Yeah.
Because especially from a sex worker perspective, because there are direct attacks on us, but we are more like independent. What is the word I'm looking for? Like it's different because we aren't all in like one workplace or we aren't in like
Hmm.
one company. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like we can't just send out like a company memo to be like, did you see this shit? Because
Hmm.
we're all like independent in different areas of the industry, in that. And so like I feel like that can make you feel very isolated in a lot of ways because you don't have like an immediate core group of people around you, right?
Yeah.
Like some of the people I talk to the most aren't even in the same state as me, you know.
Yeah.
And so like, there is no like let's just go out after work and have drinks and like blow off some steam thing.
Yeah.
Like that's just not an option. And so like I'm really trying to get over that sort of isolation to be like, okay, I'm going to force myself to like get on calls just to hang out and see people's faces on Zoom. I'm
Hmm.
going to limit my social media mostly. I'm failing with it on Blue Sky, with that. Just engaging in like basic ass types of self-care. Like I'm really focused right now because it's gardening season. I'm focused on my garden, you know.
Oh, that's great.
Um, just to like get my mind off of things, but also being
Yeah. Yeah.
realistic
Yeah.
about like what I can change and what I can't change. And it's like
Yeah.
I did the best I could do today and that's the best I could do today. And that just sort
Yeah.
of is what it is. So yeah, I don't know. My mental health. We'll see where I am in like 3 years from now.
I mean, 30 years.
It's so early in this administration. There's still
Yeah,
3 years
yeah.
to go. Oh man.
I was like, I don't know. Check in with me in like May. Like,
Right, like I barely made it like the first 3 months, man. I don't know. 3 years from now, this is
yeah.
terrible. This is brutal. Um, but
Yeah.
I'm also hoping. I don't know if it'll happen, but I'm hoping that like as more things crash down around more people, that people will see the need and value solidarity among groups that you
Yeah.
may not have previously considered. Like, because like
Yeah.
we're all going down. So, this is the time for solidarity. This is the time to work together. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
And
No, I
crocheting.
think
I,
that,
I need to crochet you something.
oh, I
I
love
love
it.
crocheting. So I just, whatever. I don't even care if you like it. I just, need to crochet something.
All I do is cook. So, like,
No, that's also
it's a sort of
fantastic.
the same thing. You're like, this is what I want to make. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. Maybe not, but like it occupied my time.
That's
It
exactly
took me
what it
4 hours
is.
to make this chili.
That's exactly what it is. Oh man, yeah. I'm like, yeah. I'm about to start making soap again. Like, yeah. I
Yeah.
just,
Oh, it's good. It's good to have like I think that like because obviously one when you've got the thing that I value so much about things like gardening or cooking or crocheting or things like that is that I never crocheted. I knit for a little bit, but
mm,
is it like you can't use your phone, you can't
mm-hmm,
use your laptop,
mm-hmm.
right? Like you are focused on something else, and it is meditative, and yet there is a thing of like you produce something,
Yes.
right? And like it like we're so lacking, I think, with social. Like it just seems like just this unending timeline,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you're like spitting into the void, and like you don't know if anything is having an effect, and like whatever. Whereas like if you make a bowl of chili or something like you have steps, you get to the end, like maybe it's good, maybe you've learned something where you're like, oh, next time I would do this or whatever. But it feels like a whole thing. It feels like a complete bit, and then also you
Yeah.
sort of give it away, right? And the same with sort of like gardening, right? Like you see day by day that like it's not about like, oh, I planted the seed and now I've got a zucchini. It's
Mm-hmm.
like day by day I have to water it. I need to make sure that the soil is this. I got to do this. I got to protect it if we're getting a chill. All of the sort of stuff that like by the time you get to the zucchini, like it's not magic. It's all of the sort of like tiny little steps that seemed inconsequential, but
Yes.
like that's what gets you to the thing that actually gets it on your plate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also like for me personally, stuff like gardening or crocheting or cooking. I also appreciate it because I have like a physical, tangible thing at the end.
Yeah.
Because like I can make posts on social media, and I do. You know what I'm saying? Like I can make memes and all that stuff, but that's not like a thing like that I can touch. Like I
Yeah.
like having like, oh, I grew these tomatoes, I can eat them. You know, I crocheted a hat, I can wear it. You know, I cooked whatever. I made soup, I can eat it. Like I like
Yeah.
having like a tangible thing because like it sort of adds to the sense of achievement for me. Like I don't know if that's
Yeah.
just me, but
No, no, that's exactly the same way. And like you get to give it away,
yeah.
right? So there's like a thing as well, like where you like share it with somebody else, or like you grow a tomato, like you have extra, or you cook something and you serve it to somebody else, and like those things are so it's really hard to get that online. It's
Yeah.
really hard to get that like satisfaction of like, oh, I helped somebody and like I participated in community. And I think that like when you talk about like the zooms or the things where you get together online, like that's so nice, right?
Mhm.
Because like you are like helping or sharing, or like things come up that wouldn't never come up. I mean, it's like one of the things that I love talking to you, like talking, like one of the reasons I love talking with you is not only because like we laugh the whole time, and have the same sort of like level of outrage and like go fuck them all. Um, but like you sort of like come out of it feeling empowered. You come out of it feeling
Mhm.
stronger. You come out of it feeling like, hey, I'm not the only one in this. And obviously, we
Yes.
know online that we're not the only ones in it. So other people are, liking or sharing or whatever. But like, there's something different about having that conversation and like being engaged in a sustained way with someone else for a prolonged period of time.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree with that because it really, because I think that it's so funny because my spouse and I have this conversation all the time because like we'll be talking about something and we always end up circling back to like the same like five talking points, and we're like, oh, did we do that again? Like we do this like multiple times a week, and it's like, is this helping? And then I'm like, actually, yeah, it is helping because it's
Yeah,
good to know. Like I know what you were gonna say, and I know what I was gonna say, but I'm just like, it's nice to have like that affirmation that I'm not the only person who feels this way,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
And I think there's like really something, there's something like very nice and calming about that, right? Because
yeah.
I think like a lot of times, and especially coming from someone who, I don't do a ton of labels, but I'll just generically say like leftist, is
Uh-huh.
like looking around me is like I'm still seeing people arguing, really bad like bad pseudoscience talking points about pornography and sex work. I'm seeing people talking about like eugenics in terms of racism. I'm seeing people who are like doing like 1940s talking points with regards to homophobia, and people who still
Yeah.
aren't taking climate change seriously, and people who still think that it's okay for like billionaires to own the federal government, and like all these like so many things. And I'm just like, am I the only person seeing this and thinking it's bad? Like, is it just me? Like, am I alone here? So it's nice to talk to other people who are like, no, I get it, and I feel the same way. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not like as crazy as I feel.
Oh, like all of that interpersonal, like I am such a phone talker, and like a Zoom, like on Zoom, I like, all I like that connection. I like seeing people in real life too, even better because you have like it is, you know, we're obviously like ostensibly a podcast. It's really just a recording of our phone call. But it's because we know all of these same things, but it is very helpful to process them again and again,
Yes.
right? And I think that every time I have a conversation with you, even though we're in agreement, we all know the same things. Like as you go through it, you refine things, right? And you
Yeah.
come up with things that you didn't think about before, or like a different angle to think about it, or and I get something from you, and it's also like a reassuring thing, right? That there is some, like you're saying, that there's somebody else who is there, who is hearing this and understands these things and has, a similar approach to it, and like that. there's somebody else in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
that's harder to get online. That visceral sense of like, I'm in this with you,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
like
Absolutely.
we can figure out we'll figure a way out of this, as best we can.
Yeah, and I have to agree with the idea that like it is good to process this stuff over and over, because I think it also helps me because I find new ways to address things. Like, not that
Hmm.
like my like core understanding or core arguments have shifted, but sometimes it's good to talk to people who are on the same page, because you're like, "Oh, maybe if I use that word instead, or maybe if I use
Hmm.
this framing instead, like I can make more progress." So, I also find it to be sort of like brainstorming, really, which is
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah,
So yeah, I'm
yeah.
there.
Like we have to find more spaces for that. I mean, I feel like we are such an online community, and I think that like figuring out ways to like, again, get together, whether it's virtually or in person, and like have conversations and go over the goddamn thing. I mean, it's like when I see my family,
Hmm.
or at least the ones I talk to, it is like all we do is sort of tell the same stories over and over again,
Hmm.
right? But like it does bring a certain amount of joy, right? Like it's like almost like there's like interpersonal memes,
Right.
and jokes and things like that, and it allows you to rethink things, and like you said, shift your argument in a certain way, like certain things where you're like, oh, that's a good way of thinking about it, or like something that might be successful, again, with like making that case with a legislator, or making that case with the press, or making that case online in a way that like flips somebody, or at least makes them think about it in a way that they hadn't thought about it before.
Hmm.
And that's only done, I think, through like rehearsal, not
Yeah.
rehearsal, but like having
Yeah.
these things. So I am always thrilled to talk with you.
I love our
Also, just mostly
conversation.
because laughing.
Yeah, a lot of laughing, a lot of laughing, which is good.
Yeah.
Embrace the joy. There's very little of it these days.
Yes, yes. I was sort of sad to see that um, there wasn't a bill near you um, this year. Like,
Oh,
maybe I'll make it out there.
that would be amazing. We would have fun.
You could
We would have fun.
introduce one, yeah.
Yes. Look, maybe Illinois, like they're trying to push a
Yeah,
decrim bill. Like, I'm just saying.
yeah.
I can drive to Illinois.
Well, yeah. I'll let you know. I mean, I was it just sort of almost hits like there's one in Ohio, there's one in Wisconsin, like, but they're not
Not quite close enough. Yes.
quite close enough. But any day now, because they're not. I
I
mean, there is
mean,
one where you are, but it's not. It hasn't moved. So
okay. Okay. Oh,
good on your
oh,
state.
yeah, I know what one you mean. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's from the guy who also wants to repeal gay marriage.
Oh,
That's
maybe.
that's the same guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's that. There is that one. I think there's a standard age verification one as
Okay.
well, but I'll have to do some research. I'm like only whatever fire is exactly in front of me.
There's too many fires to count. Like
Yeah.
that cartoon or the meme with like the dog with like, this is fine. Just sitting
Yeah.
in a bar that's
Exactly.
on
I
fire.
think
This
that
is
all the
fine.
time, as we all do. We're like, oh my god, I don't know. I saw, I saw the original source material for that meme,
Hmm.
the comic, um, a couple of like weeks ago or a month ago or something like that. And you always see sort of like this is fine with the coffee and the fire, and
Hmm.
like the last frame is like him dead and melted, like all on fire. And I was like,
Oh
oh,
no. So it
like
turns
very
out
gory. You're like, oh, this is so bleak. Like
it
I know
wasn't
that this
fine the whole time. It was never actually fine.
like it was actually just like there's a narrative there.
Oh no. It's terrible. It's terrible. All right. Well, we have done our ranting, and I think we
Yeah.
actually talked about some important stuff. Did you have anything else you wanted to throw in?
No, the only thing I'll always sort of say is that like I am online. If anybody listening wants to talk anything out, or has a question, or like doesn't know how to approach something, or like needs a resource that I might have an access to, I'm happy to help. I think that like I spend a lot of time talking with press and talking with legislators. And the thing that is absolutely time and time again most helpful for me is conversations with workers and conversations with people who have experienced things, because they ultimately become so much more powerful,
Hmm.
um, to understand like what's actually happening and to be able to give concrete examples,
Yeah.
right, to people about like how this worked or how that worked. And sometimes it's just for my own understanding and like helping me with my activism and advocacy,
Hmm.
but it is also like um very helpful for me to have examples, again, not in a way that like discloses somebody's situation without their consent,
Hmm.
but to be able to say this is how this is playing out in reality, this is
Yeah.
what's happening on the ground. So anybody, I'm Mike Stabile at Blue Sky, or Mike Stabile dot Blue Sky, I mean,
Hmm.
Stabile. You can find me, not so much on Twitter anymore, but
You
yeah.
mean the place where
or
you can't say sex work or pornography? Oh.
or can't post news,
Oh
like
God.
like
What
without
is
your link
that?
getting suppressed. Somehow
Ugh.
my follower count has gone up on Twitter since I left, which I feel like
Yeah, people still follow me on Twitter, and I'm like, I post like once every 3 months, so you know.
yeah,
But you
yeah.
know what we actually need to do though is we need to do a media training session.
Oh yeah, happy
Yeah,
to, happy to.
yeah,
I am always happy, and from, again, for like an offer, if anybody gets contacted by the media on a specific basis and wants to talk to me, I'm happy to walk through what like you're likely to encounter. I'm happy to walk through like what you should do to protect yourself. I'm happy to like run through the rules of consent with the media. Um, and try to protect yourself as best. But yes, we should do a full on media training, and we can talk about like you know what the
yes.
landscape is, and also the landscape for advocacy, for
Mm,
like actual outreach. I think a lot of the media training I've done has been around like traditionally has been around like defensive things, right? Somebody
mm-hmm.
contacts you, how do you protect yourself? But I think that we like maybe should talk about also talk about like how to do that outreach, how to contact a journalist,
Mm-hmm.
what are they going to want to hear, and how do you get your story out there? Because I
Yes,
think that is crucial.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I'll email you. We should schedule that.
Right, right.
Yes,
Yes, yes. All right.
yes. All right.
Well, a
Yeah.
dream as always.
Yes. As always, I love talking to you so much. It is
Yeah,
delightful.
I did too. You're my
Yes.
favorite.
And of course, we can also find your work being posted at FSC Army, which is also on Blue Sky. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yes.
FSC Army isn't officially me. I mean, sometimes it's me.
Sometimes
On
it's
Blue,
me.
sometimes it's there, but it's it could be anybody on the thing.
Hmm.
I try to, my Mike Stabile stuff is not officially FSC because God knows I go on some tangents that might not be actually backed by the organization. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, but FSC Army also is a source for like just general news about sort of the industry, about sort of laws that are coming up, about resources and things like that. So that's a good FSC Army. I think that was it. Is that I'm trying to think if it's the same. Yeah, it's just FSC at Blue Sky.
Okay.
It's FSC Army at Twitter, and then the website is freespeechcoalition.com.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. I was like, I had to like double check. Like, wait, I am following, right? Yeah, I am. Okay.
You, yeah,
Okay.
it was one of those things that's like this all preceded me. So like the FSC Army thing, there was a little bit of like I think maybe like there's another free speech coalition. There's always sort of like there's like a free speech coalition that's maybe like an alt-right organization.
Oh.
um, and then there's like FSC is like the Forest Stewardship Council. So like who knows? You know how those things happen,
Mm-hmm.
and then like people try to set up a social media account and it's already taken. So
No, I've
anyhow,
been there.
it's all of these different things now. Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. Okay. All right then. Well.
All right.
Okay. Yeah. I think we like hit everything. I'm like just double checking my notes. Like I think we hit everything we were supposed to talk about, right? Yeah, I think we
It's
did.
not there's always next time. I'm always happy. I'm always, like I said, I'm always happy to talk to you, whether or not it's being recorded.
you know you can call me anytime. I love talking to you. Yeah. It's good to have friends at your work, sort of, kind
Yeah,
of. We don't work at the
it
same
is.
place,
Oh,
but you
it's
know what I
great.
mean.
It's great. It's great. You were a joy online and on the phone and someday in person.
I like how when people say that as if I'm not like mean as hell online, and they're like, "But you're so nice on the phone." I'm like, I am. I am nice on the phone. But all right, I will let you go so you can go cook
All right.
something. I'm gonna crochet something. We are
Great.
gonna get through this administration, and we are gonna work it out.
We will. We will. All
We
right.
will. All
Thanks,
right.
Phoenix.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.